Chapter 8. The place where I was to be educated was a run-down building. It almost looked like me, but not quite. Mr. Waggers escorted me to my room. In the room, I found there to be one bed, no bathroom, and one human being. The young man about my age looked oddly familiar to me. I'm sure you'll get accustomed to your habitat. Tutoring starts tomorrow. Besides, you two gentle swine, there's also a giant deodorant stick named Hi-Ho who will be taking the educational benefit also. Da-da-da-da! Mr. Waggers left, and we were left alone in the room. I asked him had we met before, and he said, "Yes, when I kicked the crap out of you at Miss Blavishem's almost 10 years ago. I'm Paul." "Oh, right! No, you're right!" Giddy laughed for no particular reason, and we shook hands. I'm Pimp Achtiman. So, what do you know about this Mr. Waggers and this whole bit? Well, Mr. Waggers is terribly attractive. However, the point of this institution is to take in orphans and educate them. We are collectively supported by a benefactor who is revealed to us after we have learned the lesson. So, so you're gay. Right, he said. Oh no, wait! Then he exploded. I left the apartment to explore the rest of the institution. On my floor, the second floor out of 2, there was only one other room. The institution's bathroom, and it also seemed to be Hi-Ho's room. I went in, concluding that the door being closed and the sign "Keep Out Pimp" on the door were unimportant signs.
Hey guys, how's the movie going?
Pretty good.
Hey.
Super.
Said I didn't imagine.
He was obviously taking it off. However, it peculiarly smelled like deodorant, especially since he was a giant stick of deodorant. In a gruff and menacing voice, he said, "You're a bitch ass," and nothing more. No more was said. After that, the sound of understandable communication was not produced, and as the other side of the balance goes, nothing was perceived. I probably heard an apology, but I ignored it, and asked him some questions. "So, you're an orphan?" "Yes," he answered more calmly this time. I wafted over to him to smell his antiperspirant odor. It was very tranquil, almost romantic, even stupid. Suddenly, the bathroom was filled with a brooding cello and melancholy violins producing a rich, grieving, crying melody. My father, Ho-Ho, a chocolate donut, not unlike myself, also attended this institution. And after his education here, he found only a job working for Mr. Stinky Breath as a worker. However, his life became so miserable that he committed suicide by eating himself voraciously, almost not voraciously. A tear started to fall out of his tear producer, and so I quickly licked it off. Realizing it tasted like deodorant, I puked up the remnants back into his mouth. We then proceeded to argue about Pizza Land for quite some time, and I came to realize that this buffoon of a deodorant did not deserve to be called deodorant, but rather an antiperspirant stick, or something of that sort. I went back to my room and found that Paul had prepared a soup, which was really just a stick of butter. Nevertheless, it was good soup. However, there was a third party at the dinner table. It was Kangaroo Man. Realizing he had been there for quite some time, we remained in the state we were in until we ate him. He also provided a fine example of good soup. Chapter 9. The next day, for leisure time, I went sailing, and my raft was soon eaten by a whale. I survived inside his belly, or as they say in France, ooh la 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 la. I soon was fatigued and fell asleep. After an indeterminate amount of time, I woke up and got out by paying the whale an old yams. He demanded 100, so I paid him and he let me go back. I walked back to the institution just in time for the tutoring. For the next year or so, Paul, Hi-Ho, and I were educated by Mr. Waggers, who at the same time existed and handled court cases, being a lawyer. That is what he be and did. I met, also in depth, meaning I had gratuitous sex with him, for the first time, the secretary of Mr. Waggers, which was Mr. Blemish. One day, I happened to stroll into the office of Mr. Waggers, and found Mr. Blemish licking a lollipop so calmly as if the world actually existed. So I quickly stole it from him and puked in his face. He cried a lot, but we became good chums. In fact, we became such good chums that he invited me over for dinner to his house, which he called a castle. I did see his house, and it was more like a shack rather than a castle. So I laughed in his ugly face. which not surprisingly had a very beautiful complexion. He invited me in, and inside it was truly concise. Everything had a certain concision to it. The windows, concise. The carpet, concise. The tables, very concise. The toilet? Yep, you guessed it. It wasn't that concise. The food was not concise. Almost too concise. Mr. Blemish seemed to concisely speak to me as well. Do you want dinner? I just wanted to cuddle him for his concision. Yes, I answered. Our conversation went as follows. So, he concisely said. How is your life, I asked. He concisely replied, well, it's not that concise, but rather very concise. I'm going to be married soon to a certain Ms. Whoopa. She's perfect, meaning she's ugly and fat, but unconcise, bringing out my inconcision. At this point, I puked up his disgustingly tasting, delicious food. What can you tell me about Mr. Waggers, I asked. Well, ever so concisely, almost stupidly, he slowly said, Mr. Waggers is a good man, despite what he does. He's a lawyer, and only teaches at this institution to do a favor for his brother. His brother has gotten himself into a lot of trouble in the past, and Waggers really helps him out. You slowly said, despite what he does. What do you mean? I kicked him in the groin. Well, he's had a child with a client by way of payment, because the swine, rather like yourself, couldn't afford it in money. However, she was already married. Oh! I left this house and went back to the institution. In my room, I discovered Paul, dead on the floor. Oh, no, wait, it wasn't. Paul actually started talking to me about his past and how he was an orphan. Well, I'm an orphan because my father committed suicide. He used to work for a certain Mr. Stinkybreath. I think he also attended this institution. At this, he started sucking his thumb and faded into the wilderness. I was appalled to learn that both my peers' fathers had committed suicide. However, I couldn't recall who Hi-Ho's father had worked for, so I went down the short hall to the room, only to discover Frestella there having gratuitous sex with him. The room smelled of deodorant. I wet my pants and decided to wet my pants again. The pondering of the question why stood in my mind like a freeze frame. And then all of life seemed to come crashing down to hard reality. End of stage 3.